On Leo's birthday, I promised to grant him one birthday wish, as long as it was within my power, he said with an impatient sneer. Then I wish you would get lost. Can you do that? The people around us burst into laughter, saying, "Aren't you making things difficult for her?" Everyone knew that Ava, was a piece of gum that couldn't be shaken off. Anyone could leave, but I never would. Even Leo thought that when I finally nodded and said, "Okay." That day, I was just joking with him, until he realized that from that day on, I really never appeared in front of him again. Then I wish you would get lost. Can you do that? After Leo's impatient words, the quiet private room erupted in laughter. The candles on the birthday cake were still flickering, the dancing flames illuminating every face contorted with laughter. My awkwardness and helplessness became the perfect fuel for the atmosphere. Someone said, without a care in the world, "Aren't you making things difficult for her?" Leo, everyone knows that Ava is willing to follow you around. Anyone could leave, but she never would, right? Come on. She's just a piece of gum you can't shake off. And you're making a wish. Leo is probably sick of her by now. Amidst the piercing laughter, Leo's gaze on me remained cold. I knew he wasn't blind to my predicament, nor was he deaf to the sarcasm in their words. He was just too lazy to speak up, too lazy to defend me. And if he didn't speak up, no one would come to my rescue. I stood there awkwardly, trying to ignore the strange looks around me, and managed a numb smile. "At least let me celebrate your birthday with you first." Someone next to me snorted with laughter. "That's just too pathetic." Even Leo frowned. "Ava, are you ever going to stop? Didn't you ask me for my birthday wish? This is it. I wish you would get lost. Get lost now." After he said that, the private room finally fell completely silent. The candles were still on the cake, the wax melting into colorful tears on the frosting. I stood there for a long time with my head bowed. Then I finally looked up at him seriously and said, "Then blow out the candles. After you do, I'll leave." Leo probably found it amusing. He actually leaned over and blew out all the candles in one breath. Then, as if to deliberately provoke me, he asked, "Is that okay?" I nodded. I said okay. Then I really did get up, put on my coat, and under the silent gazes of everyone, I picked up my bag and walked to the door. Before I pushed the door open to leave, I paused and looked back at Leo, sitting in the middle. There were a lot of things I wanted to say. I wanted to say that you're allergic to eggs, so don't eat the cake from outside. It might rain later, so don't take a shortcut and not use an umbrella. If you get sick, go to the hospital right away. Don't just tough it out. But in the end, looking at his impatient eyes, I condensed everything into one sentence. Don't be angry. It's not good for your heart. I'm leaving. Leo. On the way back in the taxi, I saw a video that Leo's friend had posted on social media. In the video, a few people were laughing and making bets on how many days it would take for me to come back and apologize. Some said a week, some said 3 days, and some even said I would pretend nothing had happened and come back the next morning. When they asked Leo, he frowned and pushed the camera away, cursing that it was boring. But then someone else asked him, "You were so mean just now. Aren't you afraid Ava will really not come back?" In the video, Leo was clearly taken aback for a moment, but then he sneered. "She wouldn't dare." The video ended with a chorus of unrestrained laughter. I stared blankly at the dark screen. The female driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror several times and cautiously asked, "Honey, did you have a fight with your boyfriend?" I was taken aback for a moment, then said no, it wasn't a fight, and he wasn't my boyfriend. I almost wanted to laugh myself after I said that. I had been by Leo's side for almost 10 years, and even on the day we parted, I still had no name or status. Not a lover, not a friend. If I had to describe it, his friend's description was the most accurate. A piece of gum that couldn't be shaken off. For 4 years in college, I prepared breakfast for him every single day, as he had a sensitive stomach. I remembered all his strange allergies. I had taken care of him when he had a fever and a cold, accompanied him to the hospital, and stayed up all night by his side while he was on N4 drip. Leo had a terrible temper, and many of his friends couldn't stand him. Only I could remain calm after he lost his temper and calmly remind him, "Don't be angry. It's not good for your heart." For so many years, his friends had said behind my back that I was a pathetic, clingy person, a free nanny. They said I deserved it when Leo took me for granted and ordered me around. They said it was my fault he was so mean to me. Of course, they weren't wrong. But no one knew that I was so devoted to Leo, so unconditionally good to him. I wanted him to be healthy, safe, and carefree. But it wasn't out of love that I lost my dignity. It was because of the heart that was beating in his chest. The heart of the man I loved. In the apartment we shared, I didn't have many things. After packing one suitcase, I asked the cleaning lady to help me throw away the rest. She looked at me with pity in her eyes. These are still in good condition. Why are you throwing them away? That suitcase was full of luxury goods, most of which were things Leo had impulsively bought to chase some girl, but ended up giving to me when he didn't give them to her. There were also some as compensation. For example, after he suddenly craved a cake in the middle of the night, and I had crossed half the city to buy it, only to be left standing outside his door all night because he was too lazy to open it. For example, after he had, without any warning, given my graduate school recommendation to his new girlfriend. And for example, like today, just because he was in a bad mood, he had told me to get lost in front of everyone. As expected, my compensation would be a bag or a watch. Leo would never say sorry, but fortunately, I had never expected it. I came back to my senses and nodded at the cleaning lady, saying, "If you need them, you can take them. I don't need them anymore." With that, I booked the earliest flight to the south. I had stayed in the north for 10 years to be with Leo. I had almost forgotten that I was a southerner. Before I left, I hesitated whether to block Leo's contact information. In the end, I decided against it. He never contacted me anyway. The whole world knew how much Leo was annoyed by me. I had finally done what he wanted and left. He was probably overjoyed. Before the plane took off, I happened to see that Leo, who rarely posted on social media, had updated his status. The picture was of two clasped hands, with a caption in a little girl's voice. "From today on, he's mine." My heart clenched for a moment, but then it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. I told myself that this was for the best. I had been by Leo's side for almost 10 years, always trying to find a shadow of my old love in him, like trying to catch the moon in the water. But in these 10 years, we had become like two twisted trees, our roots and branches intertwined, strangling each other. It was good to part. He would let me go, and I would let him go. A 10-year dream. It was time to wake up. Life back in the South was very different from what I had imagined. The sudden busyness of work. The family and friends I hadn't seen in a long time. I was so busy I didn't even have time to be sad. Leo called the day I had been back in the South for a week. It also happened to be the day of our class reunion. When the name, Leo, flashed on my phone screen, I thought I was seeing things. Thinking it was an emergency, I quickly found a quiet corner and answered. But after saying, "Hello," a few times, there was no sound from the other end. In that moment, a lot of thoughts flashed through my mind. Could he be in trouble? Did he not have his medicine with him? Or did something happen? Was he hit by a car? Or was he sick and alone? For a fleeting moment, I saw the image of Daniel, covered in blood, lying in my arms. My heart was squeezed so tight I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the phone. My voice was trembling. "What happened? Leo, say something. Are you with any friends right now? Don't be scared. I'll call an ambulance right now." My mind went blank. I couldn't even think. All I could see was a sea of red blood. In that moment, I even started to blame myself. Why wasn't I with him at a time like this? What if something happened to him because I had left? A wave of guilt and despair washed over me from all sides. Just as I was about to switch out of the call interface with my trembling hands, I heard a burst of laughter from the other end of the line. "Ha ha, I told you so. She's just a spineless follower. And she's trying to play hard to get. Ha ha, I told you she was faking it. She'll show her true colors as soon as you call her." Leo was right. I stood there, as if struck by lightning. All the sounds around me disappeared. For the first time, I found these voices so piercing, so humiliating. I was still numb from the tension. I could only lean against the wall. The missing part of my heart was pierced by the howling wind. It hurt so much I couldn't breathe. Leo's voice soon came through the phone, with a familiar carelessness. "Ava, that's enough. If you don't come back, then don't ever come back." His casual tone was like a hard slap across my face, burning. My hand holding the phone was still trembling. My chest hurt so much I could barely stand. Actually, before this, I had never really been angry at him. Being made fun of by his friends. Being humiliated in public. I had never taken it to heart. I thought it was okay. But just as he casually said, "That's enough," I realized how stupid I was. So stupid that it took me until this moment, this second, to understand. Leo and Daniel were completely, utterly different people. I could no longer, as I had in the past, convince myself to find an excuse for his willfulness. I couldn't comfort myself by saying he was just immature. I couldn't pretend to be indifferent and say, "It's okay." Actually, it was never okay. Every single time, it was not okay. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. My nose was stinging. I tried to hold back my sobs, took a deep breath, and said calmly, "Leo, the game is over. I'm not playing anymore." I forgot how long I cried in that small, narrow stairwell. I didn't cry on the day I left Leo. I didn't cry when his friends made fun of me, when I was being bullied. I didn't cry when I was sitting outside his door in the pouring rain, holding a cake, waiting for dawn. I didn't cry when I stayed up all night taking care of him when he was sick. I always thought that my tears had all been shed on the day Daniel died, that I would never cry for anyone else in this lifetime. But that wasn't true. Hurt and humiliation don't just disappear after you convince yourself otherwise. Pent up emotions always need an outlet. And I finally understood that I used to cry a lot because someone cherished my tears. Crying could solve problems, and it was useful. But after he left, crying was useless. No one would ever again, with a face covered in blood, smile and reach out to wipe away my tears, comforting me that it wasn't my fault. That it wasn't my fault he got into a car accident because he wanted ice cream. That it wasn't my fault he died on his 18th birthday. Daniel knew I would blame myself, so he forgave me first. He said it was okay. It wasn't my fault. But that day, as I knelt on the ground, holding Daniel's cooling body, I just couldn't understand. He had finally escaped that suffocating home. We had both received our acceptance letters from the university, and we had just held hands as we walked out of the school with our graduation photos. We were just one step away from happiness and freedom. Why? Why was it so hard? I had written about regret and despair thousands of times in my essays, but it wasn't until that day that I truly understood what regret was. The overwhelming despair and pain were like a mountain, almost crushing me. For many, many days after that, I couldn't stop reliving that day, reliving Daniel's blood-soaked face. I was like a drowning person, sinking in my grief. I even thought that if it had been me who had died that day, it would have been better. I even wished Daniel had blamed me. But his last words were still, "It's okay." The one who died on his 18th birthday was Daniel, but I was also forever trapped on that day. The Ava after that was more like a walking corpse. I couldn't even function normally, until the day I found out that Daniel's heart had been transplanted and was beating in someone else's chest. It was as if I had a new reason to live. I knew from the beginning that this kind of transference was just self-deception. That staying by Leo's side was a form of self-abasement. A way of atoning. But so what? I didn't care. It was my own fault for sinking into this soberly. All I knew was that as long as I could see a living, breathing Leo, I could deceive myself that he was still alive, that he still had a 19th, a 20th, a 28th birthday, that he still had a new, different life, that he could still do what he wanted to do. I would always help him. I was willing to pay the price, even if it meant losing my dignity. But was I wrong? That day, I sat in the dark, narrow storage room for a long time, until my tears had run dry. Finally, I took out my phone and blocked all of Leo's contact information. I was wrong. To take a dream for reality, to have my sincerity trampled on was my punishment. After the call was hung up, the private room fell silent. Leo barely reacted. He had been hung up on by Ava. A few people started to liven up the atmosphere. She really thinks she's something, doesn't she? Does she really think she can settle down in the South and never come back? I say she's just playing hard to get. She's probably just waiting for Leo to bow down to her. A person like her. I've seen plenty. She just wants. Leo had heard these words countless times before. To his face. Behind his back. In open mockery and subtle digs. Every time Ava heard them, she would pretend not to. If she understood, she would pretend not to. Her submissive, spineless attitude, her willingness to accept any humiliation, was the root cause of Leo's cold indifference. He hated the way Ava would force a smile, hated herself, degrading acceptance. At times like this, Leo would feel that Ava was atoning for her sins through him, through his eyes, through his embrace. She was listening for another person's voice in his heartbeat. Leo always had this illusion. He felt that Ava's love for him was very shallow, very superficial. So he had never found these words sharply before. But just as Ava hung up the phone with a sob, in those few seconds of silence, Leo suddenly felt his heart skip a few beats. He thought this was not what he had expected. He had originally planned to give Ava a way out. He had originally wanted to ask why she had moved out so suddenly, without telling him. But in the end, none of it was said. Leo grabbed an empty wine glass from the table and smashed it on the floor without warning. The room went quiet again. "Have you said enough?" he asked. In fact, even Leo himself couldn't explain the source of the persistent, nagging annoyance that was weighing on his mind. Was it because he had impulsively let them use his phone to post that provocative message to Ava? Was it because he had told her to get lost in front of so many people? Or was it because he had spoken so harshly on the phone just now? Leo didn't know. Of course he didn't. Because he was used to being loved. He could repeatedly and recklessly trample on sincerity. So even with all these should-nots, there would never be a single "I'm sorry." His face turned cold again. After all, that little bit of inexplicable annoyance was not enough to turn into guilt. And that little bit of guilt was certainly not enough to make him bow his head. If she doesn't come back, then she doesn't come back, Leo thought, unconcerned. She can't possibly stay away forever. Just like the one time, the 2 times, the countless times before. There had to be a limit to how much Ava could push her luck. In June, my mother set me up on a blind date with a doctor. Her exact words were, "You've been messing around outside for so many years." I didn't say anything. "Now that you're back, don't leave again. Dr. Evans is young and successful, and his profession is stable. I think he's much better than that guy you were with in the north." I quickly cut her off, saying, "No problem. I'll listen to you." I agreed readily, but I didn't even add his contact information. My busy work schedule was a reasonable excuse, but in the end, I couldn't get out of it. On the day we were supposed to meet, Ethan had an emergency surgery and asked if I could wait for him in his on-call room at the hospital. I said yes, but as soon as I stepped into the hospital, I regretted it. The hospital was a place that held too many painful memories for me. The smell of disinfectant always made me uncontrollably recall the past. After a few minutes, I left his office, sent him a message, and was about to leave. But I didn't look at the signs, and when I looked up, I had already gone the wrong way. A few familiar people were standing at the entrance of the orthopedics department. Someone saw me from a distance and called my name. "Ava, what took you so long?" I stood there for a moment before I remembered. It was one of Leo's friends. I couldn't quite describe the feeling of my heart skipping a beat in that moment. Was it the urge to go up and ask if something had happened to Leo? Or was it the subconscious desire to escape and hide? Until someone ran over and grabbed my arm. "I told you, no matter how angry you were, you would definitely come if Leo was injured." "Ava, about last time, he half dragged me to the hospital room door, probably thinking I had received a text message and had come because of it. It wasn't until he looked up and saw my indifferent face. I took a step back and pushed his hand away. Just as I was about to speak, the door to the hospital room opened from the inside. Leo had a cast on one leg and was standing at the door with a crutch. The moment he saw me, his eyes widened with surprise, but it quickly turned to awkwardness. And finally, he said in a cold and stiff tone, "What are you doing here?" He seemed to be afraid that I would notice his emotions. He looked away from me and at the person behind me, his voice so stiff it was unnatural. "I told you not to tell her." The people behind him started to try to smooth things over, their cooperation seamless. "All right, Leo, Ava is here. She probably rushed over as soon as she heard you were injured. Right, Ava?" Leo's expression softened slightly. "Don't overthink it. I didn't come to the South specifically to find you. I just have a project here recently." I know." After I said that, Leo suddenly looked up, his gaze falling back on me. It was only then that he finally realized. My expression was not as nervous as he had expected. There was no trace of concern. In fact, it could even be described as exceptionally cold. I took a step back and finally had a chance to speak again. I didn't come to find you either. Leo's expression was for the first time a little bewildered. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but before he could, he was interrupted by a voice from behind me. Ava, didn't you say you were waiting for me in the on-call room? How did you end up here? I turned at the sound. 2 or 3 steps behind me stood a tall, young doctor. He stood there and smiled, then waved at me. Let's go. I'm done. It took me a moment to realize that this was probably the doctor my mother had set me up with. Ethan Evans. I nodded and said okay. But just as I was about to turn, my arm was grabbed. I turned back. Leo was looking at me with a dark expression, his hand gripping mine tightly. Ava, don't you dare go. He was squeezing so hard it felt like he was going to crush my wrist. I frowned and tried to pull my hand away. Let go. Leo ignored me, his eyes burning as he stared at me, his voice squeezed out from between his teeth. I'll say it again. You are not to go. But soon. Ethan strode over, pulled Leo away with one hand, and shielded me behind him. Are you okay? I shook my head, too lazy to speak again, and not wanting to look up at Leo's expression. His purpose, what he was doing in the South, why he was injured. I used to care, but after that phone call, none of it had anything to do with me anymore. Let's go. As I turned to leave with Ethan, I heard Leo's furious voice calling my name from behind, then the sound of a crutch falling, a heavy thud, and the people around him exclaiming as they helped him up. But I only paused for a moment and didn't look back. It wasn't until I was distractedly following Ethan to his car and getting into the passenger seat that he suddenly asked casually, "Is that him? The one who received Daniel's heart transplant?" I shot my head up and looked at him in shock, but Ethan's expression was as if he had expected it. It was only then that I realized where the sense of familiarity from Ethan came from. Don't you recognize me? Ethan gave a self-deprecating smile. Ava, you have a really bad memory. With that, he stopped looking at me and slowly started the car, merging into the traffic. I tried to search my memory. The gentle, calm face in front of me finally overlapped with the young, immature face from my memory. Ethan. I suddenly lost my voice, my fingers clenching, and I didn't speak again. Ethan was Daniel's roommate. We had even been on pretty good terms in high school, but after Daniel died, I started to deliberately avoid everything related to him, including people and things. I couldn't accept that everyone else was alive and moving on, while he was the only one left behind. I lost contact with many friends from that time, and Ethan was one of them. In these 10 years, besides Daniel, who was still fresh in my memory, everyone else was covered in a layer of dust. So when my mother mentioned his name, I didn't even find it familiar. How did you know about the heart? As I asked this, I couldn't help but turn to look at Ethan's profile. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. He was very different from the person in my memory. The fragmented memories I had of Ethan mostly involved Daniel being there. Seeing him, I couldn't help but wonder, if Daniel were still alive, would he be like Ethan now? Would he have become a doctor? Or a lawyer? Perhaps I had been staring for too long. Even Ethan turned his head, and I was caught off guard. Where else do you think you got the recipient's information from back then? I asked almost instinctively. Was it you? He didn't turn back, didn't look at me, just said with a hint of mockery. If I had known back then that just one sentence would trap your life in one place, I probably... Ethan said half of his sentence, then smiled again. I probably would have still told you. Ava, it was not my intention to keep you in the North for 10 years. When I told you that news back then, I just hoped you would look forward. I know a wound will heal, but the scar will not disappear. I knew you needed a reason to live, but I still feel very sorry for you. After Ethan's confession, I suddenly lost my voice. After a long silence, I finally said in a very soft voice, "It's not your fault. He just told me the news. I was the one who deluded myself into atoning for it. I was the one who willingly and degradingly stayed by Leo's side for 10 years, refusing to face reality." I suddenly found it quite laughable. The twists and turns of fate. Ethan had secretly told me that Daniel's heart would continue to beat in someone else's body so that I could move on. But I used that news to deceive myself for another 10 years. It's only now that I can calmly say that I have accepted the fact that Daniel is dead. Ava, if Daniel were still alive, he probably wouldn't want you to be like this. The car finally stopped in front of the restaurant. He turned his head and smiled at me. I know. He would never have blamed you. So you don't need to atone. You have no sin. Ethan was a pretty witty and humorous friend. If he hadn't deliberately brought it up, I would have had a hard time equating him with the Ethan from my memory. When he dropped me off at my apartment building, he pulled out a bouquet of flowers from somewhere and handed it to me. And then, in the face of my bewildered expression and actions, he explained just right. You can think of it as a gentleman's gesture. Nothing else. He was so smooth. I couldn't even find a reason to refuse. After saying goodbye to him, I walked to the apartment building with the flowers. But I unexpectedly saw someone who shouldn't have been there. Leo. After our hurried farewell this afternoon. Now, as he leaned against his car, I could see that he had indeed lost weight. Leo had a sensitive stomach and many allergies. There was very little he could eat outside. For 4 years in college, I had prepared his breakfast. Despite that, he had been hospitalized more than once for sudden allergic reactions. It wasn't easy to fatten Leo up, but it was very easy for him to become this gaunt. I couldn't quite say. Seeing him now, not very dignified, standing in front of me with a crutch, whether the pleasure of revenge was greater, or the sadness of his poor condition. Ava, you went on a date. Leo's face was grim as he stared at the bouquet in my hand. I had no intention of explaining to him. There was no need. My current relationship with Ethan, and our future relationship, had nothing to do with him. I took a deep breath and opened the dial pad on my phone. Did someone come with you? If you don't have anything else, you should. But Leo suddenly seemed to get anxious. You haven't answered me. Are you on a date with him? Ava, why didn't you go back to the north? You left without a word. And you didn't answer my calls. Ava, don't you know? He seemed to have forgotten that he was injured. As he took a step forward, he lost his balance and fell to the ground. I almost instinctively took 2 steps forward to help him up. But it wasn't until I was in front of him that I realized we had nothing to do with each other anymore. His not eating, his injured leg, none of it had anything to do with me anymore. So in the end, I just walked around him, past him without stopping, and into the apartment building. Ava. Leo was holding his injured leg, lying on the ground in a very undignified manner. Watching my retreating back, he called my name again. Ava. I don't know if it was my imagination, but the moment the door closed, I thought I heard him complain with a sob. I'm in a lot of pain. After that day, I was prepared for Leo to pester me. After all, I knew him well. He was the kind of person who would do anything on a whim. Even a dog he had raised for 10 years would probably make him sad for a while if it ran away, let alone a person who had taken care of him for 10 years. It wasn't surprising that he mistook this loss for love. People have this flaw. They only learn to cherish something after they've lost it. But I also knew that this was all an illusion, because no love would ever be born with a sharp edge to hurt the other person. I had given love, and I had received love. I knew that love was not like that. Leo didn't love me. He was just unwilling to let go. So even if he was going to be impulsive and pester me, it was normal. But to my surprise, for a long time after that day, he never came to see me again. My life returned to normal. I started to, as Ethan said, start a new life. It didn't seem as hard as I thought. I went to Daniel's grave. I found that I was no longer afraid to see the gray and white photo on the tombstone. When I passed that familiar street corner, I would no longer be frozen with fear. I started to see my old friends, to talk about the past, to say everything with a light heart. The South, which had been frozen in my memory for 10 years, was starting to thaw. I found that I was starting to be less afraid of walking forward alone. But just when I thought I could really start over, just before autumn fully set in, Leo returned. And I finally knew what he had been doing for the past few months. He had moved his entire work focus to the South. And he had even rented the apartment across from mine. Unlike my prediction of a whim, Leo's stance was as if he was going to settle down in the South for good. And what made me feel even more uneasy was that his attitude towards me had completely changed. The fresh flowers at my door every morning. The breakfast he had waited for who knows how long to give me. His shameless insistence on driving me to and from work. I could barely ignore all of that. But it wasn't until he appeared in the company's conference room as a partner, specifically asking to work with me, that I finally couldn't continue to give him the cold shoulder. I sighed and sat down across from him, closing my folder. What do you want? Leo beat around the bush. I think this project has a lot of potential. I chose to cooperate. Of course. Because. You know I'm not talking about that. Leo, you're sending me flowers, bringing me breakfast, renting an apartment across from mine, and chasing me to the south. Don't tell me all of this is for work. I looked at Leo with a mocking gaze. I knew that even if I said all this, he wouldn't apologize or admit that he liked me. Leo was that kind of person. He was proud, very proud, especially with me. No. He looked at me, as if he had finally gathered the courage to speak again. Ava, I'm here for you. I really found it both absurd and laughable when he said that seriously. We had been together for not 10, but 8 years. During that time, my dedication to him was not total, but almost. I admit, I was good to him because of the heart transplant. But all those days we spent together were not fake. Leo had never once given a positive response to my care or kindness. Of course, it was my own fault that we ended up like this. I deserved it. But since I was no longer fawning over him, shouldn't he have just stayed in the north? Why? Why did he have to come find me? Was he not done playing? Or was this some new trick? Leo, do you know what you're saying? After I asked, he actually nodded with a serious expression. I know you're still upset about what happened before. I can apologize to you. I'm atoning for what I did wrong. I hope you can forgive me. His expression softened, and he continued. The social media post you saw on the day you left the north wasn't posted by me. I didn't expect you to actually leave. Ava, I never wanted you to really leave me. I know I was wrong. Will you forgive me? I had always known that Leo was a smart person. He was very good at using his advantages to make people feel sorry for him. Finally, this tactic was used on me. But looking at his pitiful, pleading expression, I felt no stirrings in my heart at all. In that moment, I suddenly felt that there was no need to keep it a secret anymore. Even if I had owed Leo something in the past, it was long paid off by now. We were even. Leo, you had a heart transplant, right? Until I calmly finished saying everything. Leo's face was pale. In the past, he was always so nonchalant, never caring about anything. He rarely looked as embarrassed and at a loss as he did now. I don't believe you. You're lying to me. Leo shook his head and lowered his eyes, no longer looking at me. You're just angry at me. So, you're deliberately lying to me. I ignored his denial and just continued, laying my own wounds bare. You had a heart transplant in the summer of your 18th year. You only know that the donor died in a car accident, that he was brain dead. Actually, his name was Daniel. He was also 18. Leo, whether I'm lying or not, you know in your heart. He finally lost his voice completely. I knew he already believed me. After a long time, Leo finally spoke again, his voice hoarse. So you were good to me. You took care of me. It was never because you liked me, was it? He suddenly looked up, his eyes red as he stared into mine. I didn't avoid his gaze and just nodded. I said yes. After those 2 words, tears suddenly fell from Leo's eyes. I had never seen him cry before. This was the first time. He silently, his voice trembling, accused me. Liar. Ava, you're a liar. In fact, his tears continued to fall, and his words had no deterrent effect at all. But he continued to speak. How dare you treat me as a substitute for someone else? How dare you leave me after I fell for you? It's not fair. This was another one of Leo's imposing clauses. Probably only the Ava who had once unconditionally obeyed him would follow such a rule. And now, sitting across from him, the Ava who wouldn't even feel a pang of heartache seeing his tears would only say to him, "Please don't bother me again. If you're here, I can't move on." I looked at Leo's bewildered, hurt face with a serious expression. I knew it would probably take him a long time to accept that the past 10 years had been a lie. But as the beneficiary, he had no right to say more. Leo, let's just leave it at that. We're even. You don't belong in the South. And neither do I. After that day, I really never saw Leo again. The company's partner paid a large breach of contract fee, and the apartment across the street was, as promised, empty. No one appeared at my door on time every day anymore, with a bouquet of different flowers and a hot breakfast. But I still decided to move. On the day I moved, Ethan came to help me. As we were seeing off the moving truck, he, like a magician, pulled out a bouquet of lilies from the passenger seat. I took the flowers and looked at him in surprise. You don't really have feelings for me, do you? He laughed, pushed my head, and said I was overthinking it. It's a patient's annual flower delivery service. You're just lucky. Seeing my relief, he asked suspiciously, what's that supposed to mean? Am I that bad? I waved my hands and said of course not. It's just that. It was just that. I looked up at the bright sun. The late autumn wind was a little chilly. I instinctively pulled my neck back into my fluffy coat. I told him, it's just that I think being alone is good. I refused his offer to drive me to my new place. I turned around and walked forward alone, at a leisurely pace. The sun was just right. The wind was clear. In the past, I was always afraid of being alone, afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being lonely. But in the end, I found that there was nothing to be afraid of. People always have to get used to being by themselves. Being alone is good.